My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing.
Worry and uncertainty by, was it NebulaicEnigma? NebulaicEnigma. So, here goes. We tend to worry a lot about the future, our future. The future of our job, friends, family, the world as a whole. In these myriads of worries, we lose our time and mind trying to understand and straighten it out. We always try to find a permanent solution to our worries and promise to not be worried the next time. And yet somehow the next time never comes. There's always one or the other worry that fills that space and seeps our energy and time, only for it to loop again and again. The screen seems blurry. It does seem blurry. It's probably because I'm scrolling back and forth. Y'all might not be able to see the words as well here, but it might just be better to have it zoomed out. That's what I'll do. So, yeah. Sorry that y'all don't get to see it super well. So, seeps our energy and time, only for it to loop again and again. But this itself shows our misunderstanding about worry. Worry itself is absurd. Not because there aren't problems that might arise in the future, but because there's always something to worry about. An alien invasion, a volcano exploding, nukes, disease, famine, unemployment, and a million other things. There's always something to worry about. Even in utopia, we would probably be worried about losing it. And even if we had utopia permanently, our fear of being bored in utopia would drive us to tear it down. The solution to worry is the exact thing that derives it: uncertainty. The future is always uncertain, however great it might be in the moment. It could equally become hell in the next. Accidents, cancer, brain-eating worms, undetected tumors. We can't ever know what it is. Most people who die don't expect their own death. It just happens, and they are forced to expect it. Point being, anything can happen, as the future is uncertain. You could use probability of events and prepare for the future accordingly, but who is to say that you won't be the exception? There are no guarantees. The future is and forever will be uncertain. The only certainty of life is death. Not even how or when, but that we will die. Essentially, to worry in a future that is so uncertain and absurd is ridiculous, and nothing but a waste of time and energy. The only thing to do is accept this fact and resign ourselves to this reality, instead of worrying about a future that is uncertain. We live for the present instead. Plan for the future, but don't get obsessed by it. Enjoy yourself in uncertainty, as that's the only way. Worry and uncertainty. A nice little short essay, argumentative, I might say. And you argue that we should not worry. That's basically what's happening here. Worrying is absurd. All that. I have a question for you, kind of off the beginning. Nebulaic Enigma. did you write this for anything in particular, or just something that you wrote for the enjoyment of doing so? Which I guess is a reason as well. But was it for anything other than just like writing or enjoyment or whatever? Regardless, though, we have this argumentative essay, and it's laying out a few things. Now, I can, like, okay, enjoyment and sort of just let my thoughts out. Yeah, I think, like an essay, kind of trying to organize, right? So this is what an essay does. It organizes thoughts really well as a sort of structure. Usually we have some topic and then we like muse about it, think about it, sometimes try to justify or argue the topic. And it, yeah, becomes an excellent tool to just get the thoughts out and, yeah, enjoy thinking. So, first of all, that's like awesome. I think writing things like this for fun is very cool. And I don't, and I probably would like to. Now, I'm trying to think about how I want to go about it, analyzing this, right? Because normally, I take a poem, and I rip it apart, and I analyze. And I say, like, what exactly is it saying? You know, what does this thing do? And then from there, I can look at, like, how it does it, how it says those things, sound, whatever, all this stuff. And then from there, I can say, at this point, give a sort of advice, often. And this structure works well because, like, one, I'm good at this. And two, it means I have some amount of, like, justification for the things I say. Now, I'm not particularly incredible at, like, reading or understanding or writing like this. So it should be fun. But I have... Okay. Maybe we can look at your argument, because that's what an essay is. Often. For those who aren't familiar with the idea of an essay in itself. So an essay, sometimes we talk about having a thesis, which is a very important word. And a thesis is basically an argument. This is kind of the point. It is what I am trying to say in my essay. And it's not always that I'm like literally trying to convince someone of something, but that's often the case. Sometimes it can just be a informative work, other things, descriptive, whatever. But in this case, I think we align pretty well with the idea of the thesis. And a good thing we can do in looking at an essay, if we're trying to decide on, let's say, I mean, you say, I guess, just a review. So maybe you're looking for some idea about, like, quality. Now, I don't necessarily believe in telling other people the quality of their work. I don't think it helps anyone. And usually my ideas don't really matter that much because I'm just someone. But we can talk about what your argument seems to be and how effective you are at arguing your argument. Not so much a general quality, but a more descriptive effectiveness. You know, a poem has some intention to make someone feel. An essay has some intention to teach or convince or argue or enlighten. So we can say, well, if our point is that, how well does it feel that our essay does this? How effective is it? So, a lot of the times we can find people's points at the start or the beginning of a work. It depends, and there are a lot of different structures of essay. Sometimes the point exists throughout, but sometimes people will kind of give an introduction, and then somewhere around here tell you their point, and then go on and argue it for a bit, maybe some paragraphs, and then they'll conclude again, reinforce their point. These are ways people write essays. Now, sometimes we just start with some writing and start to build up ideas, we add more ideas, new things, and then by the time we get to the end, we have some kind of a point. The work here looks a little more like this. And then, some things are just a bunch of lines, and you have little bits of your point throughout that are more obfuscated, hard to find, hidden, and one must look at the whole piece to understand it. So this says, looking at the end, plan for the future, but don't get obsessed by it. Enjoy yourself in uncertainty, as that's the only way. And this seems like a decent description of what you say throughout. So, looking at this, we tend to worry a lot about the future. Future of our job, friends, family, world as a whole. Kind of like a whole lot. Big scale, lots of things to worry about. And these myriads of worries. So we're really starting this poem talking about the degree of worry that is kind of happening in many people's lives. And we lose our time and mind trying to understand and straighten it out. So we're kind of suffering because we are doing an undue amount of worrying. Always try to find a permanent solution to our worries and promise to not be worried the next time. I'm just gonna bracket this for later. And yet somehow the next time never comes. There's always one or the other worry that fills the space. Always worry. Worries. Seeps our energy and time, only for it to loop again and again. So this points to worry as a sort of unescapable thing, or just a very difficult thing to escape. And something that maybe latches onto us. And I think that's where but don't get obsessed by it is a pretty useful thing that we could call part of our thesis in this work. But this itself shows our misunderstanding about worry. Worry itself is absurd. Not because there aren't problems that might arise in the future, but because there's always something to worry about. All sorts of things, big scale, small scale, personal, sort of fantastical, or maybe quite unlikely, natural, societal, natural, all sorts of different things. And a million other things. There's always something you can worry about. Okay, so here's a point. One point is that you can always worry. And that's supporting our argument. So sometimes how essays work, or how we can analyze them, is through an argument and evidence. So we have maybe something like, don't worry. And we support this by saying, well, why should I not worry? It's absurd. And then someone will say, okay, well, prove to me that it's absurd. And you say, okay, look, there is lots of worry. There's always something to worry about. And that is reason to not worry, or that it is absurd to worry about one thing in particular. So that starts to make an argument there. Even in utopia, we would probably be worried about losing it. So this is like, we are always worried. Fear of being bored in utopia would drive us to tear us down. Constantly worried, constantly worried. Solution to worry is the exact thing that drives it. Uncertainty. So we'll pause there. So you say, we are always going to be worried about something. And that's an interesting justification for don't be worried. I don't think it's bad, but you say, like, it's interesting, right? We are always worried, thus, don't add any more worry to your life. You're going to be worried. Why are you doing more than you perhaps need to? That's sort of what it reads as. And that's pretty reasonable. Like, there's lots of things to worry about. Why would you add more? Future is always uncertain. However great it might be in the moment, it could equally become hell in the next. Okay, so here's maybe another point: uncertainty. Accidents, cancer, brain-eating worms, undetected tumors, we can't ever know what it is. Most people who die don't expect their own death. It just happens. They're forced to expect it. Point being, anything can happen as the future is uncertain. You could use probability of events to prepare accordingly, but you might just be an exception. So, sometimes there's like, I don't know, it's random. I said this to my therapist like last week. I'm like, I don't really think I should worry about that much in life. Like, all the things we worry about are a little silly because we might just get hit by a car. Like I said this, by a car. Like, you can walk outside, cross the street, and then someone is drunk driving 120 miles an hour around a bend and end your life. This is like a very possible thing. It can just happen. So, like, when that's a possibility, I mean, there's some argument that maybe life, all the worries we have are a little silly because they're completely out of our control anyway. That's maybe a point to add to this. No control over them. Even if you worry, there are a lot of big things you can't change. So, most people who die don't expect their own death. It just happens. They're forced to expect it. Point being, anything can happen in the future is uncertain. You could use probability. There are no guarantees. The future is forever and will be uncertain. Yes, the only certainty is life is death. Just that we will die. Essentially, to worry in a future that is so uncertain is absurd and ridiculous. Nothing but a waste of time and energy. The only thing to do is to accept this fact, resign ourselves to this reality, instead of worrying about a future that is uncertain, for the present instead. So, we have two main points. One is kind of like, there's always these things to worry about, and they just make our life worse. And then, that worrying about things doesn't really help us, and it's absurd because it's all uncertain anyway. Reasonable. And then, you have an interesting line here. And I know you said you just sort of wrote this to, like, think about your thoughts and, like, process some of this. But you say, the only thing to do is accept this fact. So, this is a very interesting line. The only thing. So you offer a solution. The only solution. Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with saying that. But we have to be pretty sure about ourselves when we offer something as the only solution. Otherwise, we're probably just being kind of narrow in our scope of things. And this is why a common part of the essay, which I didn't explain before, is usually before our conclusion, we have some amount of counter-argument And this is basically saying, okay, I have these thoughts on worry, and I think they're pretty reasonable. Like, I personally, actually, me, Ginny, like a lot of these ideas on worry. But then you say, okay, you go look up. You say, like, well, what do other people say about this? What do other people think about worry? Maybe you look up, like, solutions to worry. Maybe you go try to find someone who says worry is a good thing and helps us. Because these, of course, very much undermine our argument that our way is like the only solution to worry. And this is why the counter-argument is so crucial. If we don't address these things, then someone who, say, disagrees with this essay and says, well, no, worry is good in some cases. There are people who very well might say that. Worry is sometimes good. Well, you don't argue against that person. You don't really engage with their idea, so they're left to just assume that, they can be reasonable in their idea, you yours. And that's fine. We don't always have to change people's minds. It's very difficult to. But if we're talking about an essay, an argument, it's one thing we could do. So I could say, me personally, well, you say the only way to deal with worry is just to accept it, resign ourselves to this reality instead of worrying about the future that is uncertain. I offer you a counter-argument. I think it is possible to work so hard and control one's life so much that worry can end, and you will stop worrying. I don't necessarily believe that, but someone might say it. Here's another counter-argument. I think if I get enough money, then I'll probably stop worrying about most of these things. I'll be safe. I'll be able to, eat healthier food, have better medical treatment. That's a solution to worry. Deal with all of my material problems. Here's another one. I'm going to sit and meditate and completely destroy my sense of ego, or control my sense of ego through Buddhist meditation. And this will free me from worry. So suddenly we have 3 competing solutions against your only solution of worry. Now, some of them are pretty clearly not that good of arguments, of my hypothetical arguments, but they are possible arguments. And a good essay, I think, is very bulletproof. It's very difficult to kind of beat the ideas of a good essay. And this basically comes from 2 things. 2 things. We have our idea, and we have how it deals with the ideas of others. If our idea is very strong in its own right, then people will not just be able to deny it off of, say, lacking evidence or value. And then, if we can be if others cannot do better, then in a sort of Socratic way, we can say that, this person should then come to our idea and agree with us. Well, you don't have a better idea. You have no reason that you can deny mine. So, seems like you're convinced, right? Now, this seems very simple, but it's kind of impractical, right? This is very difficult to do. Well, so this case, I was just trying to make justification for my idea instead of offering counter-arguments. But if I were to expand this, I would have to counter-argue those objections. Absolutely. And I'm not necessarily pointing this as a fault in your writing in the moment, because, like you said, you just sort of wrote this for yourself. But in some sense, there's a confidence that can come from oneself if you can show yourself that you can argue with the other arguments you can create in your head, because you can probably create counter-arguments on your own without other people. So why might I disagree with the things I'm saying? That's a really cool, that's where you start thinking. That's introspection. So there's that. But I do get, like, mostly just laying out the initial ideas for yourself. And that's important too. Now, I do want to keep talking about this because this is interesting, but I'm going to run a quick ad break. So do some self-care, don't watch the ads, and I'll be back shortly. And don't worry about me. I'm just safe over here. No need to worry. It's the objective for this ad break. No worrying. No worrying allowed. Worrying about not worrying. Yep. Stretch. Stretch. Ooh. Oh, that was a good crack. Good. Good stretch. Okay. Welcome back. Still Ginny. Still the poet of Twitch. Still reading Worry and Uncertainty, a short essay on just that by NebulaicEnigma. I'm not going to read the whole thing again because it's a little long, but we'll keep talking about argument and all of that. Ray, welcome. How are you? Good to have you. So, we sort of talk about dealing with the arguments of others. And this is something that's sometimes useful in the essay, the counter-argument. We like to have them, and maybe something that we would consider well-developed. But I do find it more important to have an idea of one's own, right? This needs to be very strong. Because if someone can go in and find a way to break your idea fundamentally, then it doesn't even matter how you argue against anything else because you're just as unjustified as they are. So then this is a question. What makes an idea good? Well, maybe that's like a really bad way to put it. Because good is a pretty useless word here. But I think we can say justified, strong. What makes it so my idea works and is compelling, perhaps? Doesn't mean ideas have to be these things to be good, but this is like what we're looking for in an essay. How do we do that? How do we justify something? Well, we want solid evidence. If we're talking about, I don't know, reason. I cannot write this. Something about the V into the I. Evidence. Reason. Logic. These things. This is usually what we think about when we think of a good argument. Now, there are other things. Personal experience can be a powerful piece of evidence that sort of, does not involve itself with reason and logic all of the time. Some people will take tradition and history as evidence. Now, this is sort of fallacious, but it works often. These are all things: reason, logic, experience, whatever, wisdom, science, data. These things are great. These things help us. You redeemed hydrate. I will hydrate. Thank you. With the water jug. Okay. So. You redeem stretch. I can stretch while sitting. Stretches are good though. Don't stun lock me with self-care though. I'm surprised no one has done that. Like redeeming 100 stretches. So. We have evidence. We use this to support our thing. But it's not just about having evidence, right? I can have a big, let's say I have a big pile of books on my shelf. And all these books are stacked up, and they have all this evidence that is supporting my idea. And I'm certain the idea is there. And all these books, maybe not even books, maybe some of it's my own thought, maybe some of it is records of my experience, whatever, all this stuff. It's on the table. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So I have all this knowledge, all of this logic. You just say, yup, yeah. This is not an essay. So we somehow have to get from having strong evidence to having strong communication of evidence. See, I have lots of good ideas, I think, about stuff, about poetry, about some philosophy maybe. But usually I just come to them myself and don't have strong evidence, and I don't really have the desire to communicate them very clearly. Thus, I do not end up with essays, I end up with poems. However, there are sort of traditional formats to how we do this. So what people like to do in the essay is sometimes we'll have a topic. This could be an argument. Let me have the topic first. No. So we have our thesis. Our thesis is the big thing in which everything is inside. In our essay, we have one big idea we're trying to say, or multiple. This is a very bare bones outline. And everything within it should relate to it. So we can think about this as nesting. So we have a topic and an argument, something that maybe relates to the thesis. And then we can't just say, worry is useless because it's absurd. Maybe it being absurd is the first topic, but we have to justify this. So we had some amount of evidence. And this basically repeats evidence until we feel like we have justified this. Evidence can also contain things within it, literary tools. Let's say a quote can be something that supports a piece of evidence, or it can be a piece of evidence itself. This is kind of how an essay is formatted. But fundamentally, all of this goes into this topic. And then we can have more different, like, arguments, topics, whatever. And then we can also do, like, counter-argument, and this should all have the same, like, evidence and justification inside. And theoretically, if we do all this stuff enough, we end up with a thesis that has been very justified. If you don't mind me asking, what did you major in? I dropped out of college after a year and a half. Everything I say is based on my experience of essays I've read, essays I wrote in high school, a couple that I did in college, and just what I've seen as working. Like, obviously this fairly closely resembles the essaic structure you might see in, like, high school. Of, like, they call it, like, the 5-paragraph essay. But this is, like, all of this can be in different orders. Things can go over here, it can loop back, whatever. I believe more in the idea of the essay as a literary genre. The essay is try to attempt at least, not a treatise. That is to say, it can be an opinion, not a... Yeah, but leaves us with one of several questions. Okay, so that's a good point. Yeah. Essays do have a feeling of, like, unanswered. This is a very, like, logical look at the essay as having a purpose. This is like a scholastic kind of essay. Now, you're also right, Ray, is that essays have, like, a literary point. So we can't just do this. This is what, like, a book of philosophy looks like. And these are really boring. Like, Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant kind of takes this structure to its extreme. And we'll talk about the communication part of this as well. So what I do for work now, basically I am living with my parents and they support me because when I crashed out of college 9 months ago, it wrecked my mental health, and this is me trying to make it as an artist. So I don't work. What is my opinion on the context of this essay in particular? Yeah. So basically, the point of all of that structure is that this essay does some of that on, like, a very straightforward level. Gives us a sort of introduction that tells us about life. It starts to lay out these topics and tries to justify them with a sentence or two after, and then does it again, and then does some justification. That's roughly what this does. It looks a bit like an abridged version of this structure. Now, to Ray's point, we also want to write in a literary way. Or at least I care about it. Ray cares about it. Because we here like literature and beautiful writing. And so, sometimes we can, like, abscond a lot of this structure to just have an idea. The coincidence is too much. Today I just left a translation of an essay on Discord. Awesome. So yeah, we want them to be literary. We want them to be beautiful. And part of this is because, well, we want to communicate with people. I'm going to read you something just to point this out. It comes from this book. And Ray, you know what kind of language is coming. But this lacks the kind of artistry. And this is just in the introduction. For pure speculative reason has this peculiarity that, comma, in choosing the various objects of thought, comma, it is able to define the limits of its own faculties, comma, and even to give complete enumeration of the possible modes of proposing problems to itself, comma, and thus sketch out an entire system of metaphysics. For, on the one hand, in cognition a priori, nothing must be attributed to the objects of what the thinking subject derives from itself, and, on the other hand, reason is, in regard to the principles of cognition, a perfectly distinct, independent unity in which, as to be organized as a body, every member exists for the sake of the others. Yeah, the Goblin Boy Kant. Like, we can't write this as writers because no one reads it other than just, like, insane people like me. What did I drop out? Or what did I do before I dropped out? First it was music, then I stopped playing music. I played the saxophone. It's kind of there in the background. And then I switched to 1 semester of a basically writing degree, kind of, but didn't really take any writing classes. Sort of like a humanities. I was doing some like linguistics and history stuff too. I basically am not college educated. But so we want things to be beautiful. We do not want them to be dull. We do not want them to be as boring and painful to read as Kant, because no one will enjoy them. And usually people are, if we're talking purely out of the purpose of argument, people are going to latch on more to an argument that they understand and that is enjoyable. Well, Kant actually wrote a treatise in the Critique. The idea of the treaty as a bunch of essays strung together is in a logical and systematic structure. Yeah, I'm not saying the Critique is an essay, but it's like a big logical system. And if we just look at essays like this, it's not super great. So we want to do something else. We want to be like literary about it. And so we want beauty as well. And you do start to accomplish this in some sense. So how do we make writing beautiful in general? So one thing is the words. You use some like solid word choice. We have like myriad, we have that stuff. This helps there be some like beauty in the language. But like just the words we use is not enough. It's not going to cut it. And I'm going to default to my poetry brain here. And I consider the holy trinity of poetry to be sound, meaning, and structure. During the analysis of Penguino Man, of his poem, I basically went through these things. I talked about how does it sound? Let's go through the rhymes, the alliteration, the stuff that makes this kind of linguistically beautiful to read. Let's talk about the meaning of your poem, find how things connect, what it means, what's it saying, and structure, how are you using the order and way and manner of the words to communicate your ideas. And I think this applies beyond poetry. But let's say we look at a poem like this. So, in terms of structure, like I think this is where something like this is lacking, let's say. You sent me a block of text, which, no one really likes reading. I'm fine to read them, but it is not doing anything structurally interesting, right? It's sort of sentence followed by sentence followed by sentence, which is sort of a miss in terms of structure. And there are so many more things that we can do with structure that is fun, right? Of course, there's like paragraph breaks, whatever. Like just having something look a little more appealing. Because basically the idea of like the school kind of essay is that we'll organize one idea into a paragraph and then organize the next idea into a paragraph and then, that kind of thing. And then sometimes we have like big sections that divide between each other. And this is how we get some, more cohesive structure. Again, not to say I'd expect it out of you just like throwing some ideas down, but structure is very important for conveying our idea. Now, it doesn't just have to be these things. Part of structure is how things connect within your work. And notably, this sort of very linear justification connection is not how it has to be done. This is like the base, boring thesis. But, sometimes our ideas, our words relate to multiple things, and thus, like, this stops working, and thus it risks sounding repetitive. Sometimes our topics meld into each other. Sometimes one topic calls back to another, and that makes like connection. I think having a work that is deeply interconnected is a structural endeavor. And that comes through, beautifully introducing and then kind of also wrapping things up at the end and having this cohesion and this dance throughout the writing. Ortega y Gasset defined the essay as science without explicit proof, which is quite accurate if we look at it in the broad terms of the essay. Yeah. And for my purpose, like in my opinion, I think we should add some amount of beauty to this science without explicit proof. Because, and maybe that's where like the non-explicit proof comes in. That's what makes it beautiful. So yeah, it's how can we talk about, let's say, worry in a way that relates to our reader, convinces them, grips them, whatever. Meaning, the underlying thing, we want to have a strong ideas. So, and you have a sort of argument here. Meaning is also your kind of counter argument, whatever. And that would just be making sure you have strong ideas. I think, even if it's without explicit proof, it should be very, it's not explicit proof, but it's proof in a sense. And then there's sound, which is just like the artistic writing, which is more of a poetic tool, but you can probably apply it to the essay. So, as for this essay, what do? First of all, in terms of structure and sound, we worry a lot about our future. Okay. Future, our jobs, friends, family. So, a dangerous thing in writing for me is we, and especially when it says we always. This is maybe my biggest sort of like critical point on this actual writing. And of course, I don't like care to be too harsh on it because it's fairly, I don't know. It seems like, you said, you just wrote this for yourself, for enjoyment. But we always try to find a permanent solution. So we says, I know something about you. Can be dangerous as a writer unless you're very, very sure. Like, yes, we tend to worry a lot about the future. That's true. Most people, pretty much everyone, has worried about the future. But do we always try to find a permanent solution to the worries? Does everyone always try? Or are some people happy to stay in their worries? Or do some people revel in worries and have the drug of worry that is like social media? We love like disaster politics. So does everyone try to always find permanent solutions? Maybe not. If everyone was always trying to end worry, the world would probably look pretty good. So suddenly, like, we always looks like a sort of like dangerous thing to say. But I understand what we're trying to do here, right? It seems like this can relate to the reader. We tend to worry a lot about the future of our job, our family, friends, whatever. These are things that most people do worry about. Now, how can we flip it? Instead of saying, I know something about you, essays can, for example, ask questions or prompt the reader. Now, you think about someone actually reading this. Most people usually don't want to be told what they think. But if a piece of writing gives them space to think, okay, fair enough. Slow down. So, we have this as a sort of relation to our reader. We tend to worry a lot about our future. This places the writer and the reader in the same sort of sphere. Just kidding. Well, I probably should slow down and explain it step by step anyway. And sometimes I see this in poetry particularly, is people will try to tell you about how life is and how your life is and how all love is, which is not usually particularly compelling. Someone talking about their love or what they find great love to be is fine, but don't tell me how to love. Similarly, don't tell me what I feel or what I worry about. And so we can flip it though. And one of the ways is to ask a question. This is something that the essay can do directly or indirectly. Poets usually can't call out the reader and say, like, what do you think about this? But the essay could prompt at the beginning. It could ask or prompt the reader to think about the things they worry about. And suddenly, rather than telling them, we tend to worry about the future, you invite them to begin your reading in a state of worry. And now you're like playing with their mind. This is where you can get into like subversion and like actually impacting your reader, right? You kind of want to make them feel. Feeling is a pretty convincing thing. So if you begin by prompting your reader to in some way get really worried about life, maybe start like doomsaying about the end of the world, and then like point out the fact that this reader is accomplishing nothing in their worry, you already have sort of accomplished in a small way your argument. Like, what if you wrote in such a way to get the reader to worry about an alien invasion? Something absurd like this. Or just everything, so many things, overwhelming worry. And then navigate and show them that it's pointless to worry. That's more interesting than perhaps telling them that they might worry about these things. And like Ray said, this is not the only solution to do this, but this is a, what did you say? Something, science without explicit proof. So you sort of prove it to them because you've made them feel it. If you can get someone to feel and realize your feeling that worry is absurd and useless, it's probably going to be more effective than like logicking them. Of course, this is rooted in maybe your argument of the absurdity of worry. But if we make them feel it, we haven't done anything scientific or logical or concrete, explicit proof. But, I mean, what is it? Explicit, right? Outwardly clear. The alternative would be implicit proof. What would that mean? Implicit, perhaps, to the person. Within them. Feelings. We can prove through feelings as much as we can prove through logic. So, there's like many other methods, I guess. Doors that you could go through to try to make this argument more compelling in some way. Of course, like one option is also to get way more logical, which is sort of what I outlined at the start. And you could go through every detail about utopia and justify all of this and uncertainty and the various uncertainties. You could talk about statistics and quotes from literature. Like whatever. that's a logical solution. And that is something that is a great skill and very fun. Or you can go in like the feeling direction. And you can have some of both, sure. Like the essays of the 16th century, more interested in convincing than demonstrating. Absolutely. And yeah, that is one way to write an essay. Now the thing is, so here's something I have to say sometimes. You submit and you say, I don't know, I just kind of want a review of this essay. Like, mostly, I like to read things, I like to look at what they're saying, and then I like to be like, okay, how can I help this person do what they want to do? I don't think a review, any sense of, say, oh, I think this is quality or not, is very helpful to you. So, because I don't know, necessarily, if you have aspirations of what to do with this essay, or what you want, or how you want it to be better, or how you think it might be good or not good, and how we can work with that. You see, like the questions fuel my ability to provide for you all. And then no one writes questions, and it's very frustrating sometimes. You're new though, so I can't blame you. So in terms of like the direction you might actually go with this essay, like, I don't know. It's your essay. Because this is like a good beginning. I think the idea that like worry is probably something we do too much of is very real. And you could dig more into all the ways we worry and all of that. You could dig more into that actual individual feeling of worry and that convincing kind of thing. You could look at it in a whole host of other ways. You could look at what different religions say about worry. And there's like a million ways to do this. You can read philosophers. You can go read Camus and absurdism. You use absurd here. It pretty much relates. And like, point being, you have like a million directions you can go with a little piece like this. And that should be deeply inspiring. It can be a little daunting, but it's like, oh, I have this thing, I have an idea. You clearly like this idea enough, or thought about this idea enough within yourself to write it down. And so the only thing I can do is encourage you to write more about it and figure out the best way to communicate your ideas. Like, I would hope that you want to do that if this is an idea of yours that you like. Because if you're really, let's say, passionate about people worrying too much, then it seems logical that you might want to show people that there is some way to not worry. And you seem to have identified a sort of solution to this. The only thing to do is accept it. So then it's, how can I take this and show people to accept that worry? But how you might do that, there's a million different ways to do it. So, all I can really do is encourage you to write, because your actual writing is good. Like, your sentences are well put together. There's like a grammatical thing here and there, but like, that comes with time. That's not something I feel obligated to help people with. That's not what I want to help people with. Make them worry about worry. Yeah, if you make them worry about worry, then yeah, that's another way to take the essay. I don't need to convince you to stop worrying. If I just convince you that worrying is an issue, so you worry about it too and want to somehow bring an end to this worry of yours, there's a million ways to do it, right? And it's about how you want to do it. I mean, you said make them worry about worry. So that's probably an approach. Write a piece that will genuinely make another person worry about their worry as an object. And that'll probably do you pretty well. Do you have any questions, NebulaicEnigma, or anyone else in chat? Any folks, any questions, any thoughts, any concerns, any comments? Disagreements with me. The essay is not like my preferred form of writing. I know some about it, but it is a struggle. I guess then format and structure. Yeah. I guess it depends. Like, it's hard. Focusing on that would be helpful. Yeah, that could certainly help your essay. And in that regard, so like one thing is reading essays. And these come in a lot of places, like op-eds in newspapers, opinion pieces, generally resemble an essay. You can look up like famous essays on blank. There are essays on all sorts of social issues. This is what people like to use essays for. And you can see how some people do them as a very structured, trying to convince you thing. Some people will write more based on stories and their experience. I had a friend read me one of their essays recently, and it was basically a stream of consciousness retelling of their entire life with various points that they'd identified as like through lines that tied it together, and by the end made you realize like themes and ideas through their lives and how you might apply that to your own. So in terms of like what structure this would be, I don't know. But I mean, like, literally, we have so many structures. Video essays are a structure of essay. But all I can say is, like, consume essays. If you want to know how to write an essay, I'm not an essayist, I'm a poet. But I can tell you to read essays, watch essays. And you'll probably figure some things out. You don't need anyone to teach you how to write. NebulaicEnigma. The only thing is to read things that you think are good writing. Ask yourself, why is this good? Why do I like this? And then say, how do I do this? Sometimes emulate. Change things. That style, your own voice. And then through a grasping of all of these things, you eventually come to be able to write really good writing yourself. Also looking at your own writing and saying, how can this be more effective? How can this do what I want? And then you'll probably be a pretty good writer. I'm just gonna read the essay again to close this one off. Bookends, because stream is like almost over. I'm like running out of time. So here's a short essay, Worry and Uncertainty by NebulaicEnigma. And I'll read Raymondu's comment afterward. We tend to worry a lot about our future. The future of our job, our friends, our family, the world as a whole. In these myriads of worries, we lose our time and mind trying to understand and straighten it out. We always try to find a permanent solution to our worries and promise to not be worried next time. And yet somehow the next time never comes. There's always one or the other worry that fills the space and seeps our energy and time, only for it to loop again and again. But this itself shows our misunderstanding about worry. Worry itself is absurd, not because there aren't problems that might arise in the future, but because there's always something to worry about. Alien invasion, a volcano exploding, nukes, disease, famine, unemployment, and a million other things. There's always something you can worry about. Even in utopia, we'd probably be worried about losing it, and even if we had utopia permanently, our fear of being bored in utopia would drive us to tear it down. The solution to worry is the exact thing that drives it. Uncertainty. Future is always uncertain, however great it might be in the moment. It could equally become hell in the next. Accidents, cancer, brain-eating worms, undetected tumors. We can't know what it is. Most people who die don't expect their own death. It just happens, and they are forced to expect it. Point being, anything can happen, as the future is uncertain. You could use the probability of events and prepare for the future accordingly, but who is to say you won't be an exception? There are no guarantees. The future is and forever will be uncertain. The only certainty of life is death. Not even how or when, but that we will die. Essentially, to worry in a future that is so uncertain is absurd and ridiculous, and nothing but a waste of time and energy. The only thing to do is accept the fact and resign ourselves to this reality instead of worrying about a future that is uncertain. We live in the present instead. Plan for the future, but don't get obsessed by it. Enjoy yourself in uncertainty. That's the only way. Worry and Uncertainty by NebulaicEnigma. Thank you for submitting this. I've only read like one other essay on stream in its entirety, so I really appreciate you sending something different and also just having like the courage that it always takes to send one's writing to someone. So like awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.